sounds so artificial. All right, so when we were looking last week on worldview and saying that it's not just your culture, worldview is how reality, goals, ethics, and purpose for humans and for other species, depending on your culture, is constructed. So the term that we've been using for this in anthropology is animism. And it's not something that comes from one particular cultural terminology or words. It's just applied from outsiders. However, it works for us because it gives us a good something we can connect to. So animism is when we apply this or we label or describe things that are going on with other, with yourself, your own culture, or maybe with another culture, with anything that humans are doing. When we can see, when they're telling us or showing us, or you're learning it because it's your family, that there's no real separation between the spiritual, or we're using the term incorporeal, right? Without a body that a human can touch or see, and physical, which would be corporeal, like you can touch a tree or you can see another person, and you can see the landscape and things like that. That in some human societies, there isn't any real difference in terms of value or their concept of reality. So for these, when we used a couple of different examples of things that we might still do, even if this isn't a mainstream of our society today, that spiritual life, and maybe in some of the modern languages, we could call that soul force, that it exists. And in animism, it also is carried or acted upon by other types of living things. So plants, animals, and in some cases, it's also in the landscape. So it could be rocks, rivers, geographic features, the entire environment itself. In other words, that phrase that has a lot of translations in a whole bunch of modern languages, Mother Earth, that the planet itself is the repository of another overarching universal consciousness that's there. So, and it can include things like aspects of weather and so forth. Okay, so what I want to do is get out of this one. So I'm going to stop share on this and go over and show you just an example that I found because I was looking up something else, but I remembered seeing it a few months ago. It's an interview just from a couple months ago. So I'm going to stop sharing on this one because it won't let me. Okay, there we go. You should still be recording this. So do you see that this is linking up to a webpage from a site called Latino Rebels? You might find this very, very interesting too. It's a very cool site where they take a whole bunch of things from a lot of sources. So it has, yeah, it has quite a few perspectives for all of this. And you can see some of it's political, it can be other things. Now this particular page here from the website where it says tribal leader, work to build border wall hurts sacred land. When you look this up just in general from other sources, because this was a very important legal battle going on between, you can see the road right here, going on between things that are happening with the US federal government in regards to building the border wall or repairing it or extending it. And one of the several groups, but probably the largest ones that have been heard, that have an aspect along that, where they are forcing the building of the wall through what is not just private property, but in this case is acknowledged as the cultural territory of another culture. And in this particular case, the group is the Tohono O'odham. and this is in Arizona. If you look for writing about what happened in February 2020 for these particular hearings that were taking place, I believe with the Senate for this one, if you look at it and it's a news station from Arizona, then they report that Chairman Norris Jr. here did testify, and that he was telling them that the construction of the blasting, the blowing up of the mountains and the area was of extreme concern. But the whole rest of the article, they might give him a couple seconds of talking, but the whole rest of the article of this one, so you all, can we wait on the map chat till we get finished with this one? I see that all of these are here. And as I said, this is going to be, because the map isn't due until tomorrow or later in the week, that this is going to be recorded so you can take a look at it again. All right, so if you look at it from other sources, not particularly this website did try more than most of them to actually just let him say what he has to say and have it be what he's actually trying to communicate. Most of the rest of them, they have a little bit of him talking, maybe a couple seconds, but mainly they're saying, well, you know, environmentally, this is an important area, but the government has confirmed that that they're not harming anything. It's not a cemetery. Oh, by the way, yeah, and then somebody else will say, yeah, but the animal species. So again, moving around and around and around something that we're learning about in class, which is that their definition of real and important is not the same. And since for the news stations, they don't think that the listeners either care or would understand, they just didn't really report it. So let's look, this is very brief of what he's trying to say. Here it says, and again, they're still reporting that this is from a phase where the US government was blasting a border through a protected natural repository park type zone, and they're making a 30-foot wide, or 18 meters, which is more than that, right? Like a more than 40 feet wide blasting area so that they can put up this wall. Environmental groups, which are not the tribe, are very upset as well because they're destroying an impacted environment. But then, so here this one, it says, it's hard to see the blasting that you showed on the video today because I know in my heart what our elders have told us that is home to our ancestors. So let's listen to him for a moment.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is an honor to have been invited to testify before you today. It is my great honor also to recognize Committee Chairman Raul Grijalva, in whose district our tribal nation is located. I am Ned Norris Jr., and I am the chairman of the Tohono Nation, a federally recognized tribe with more than 34,000 tribal citizens. We have lived in what is now Arizona and northern Mexico since time immemorial, with no consideration for our sovereign rights or the welfare of our people. The international boundary was drawn through our ancestral territory in 1854, separating our people and our lands. As a result, our reservation shares a 62-mile border with Mexico, the longest along the southern border of any tribe in the United States. 17 O'odham communities with approximately 2,000 tribal citizens are still located in our historical homelands in Mexico. O'odham on both sides of the border share the same language, culture, religion, and history. Our citizens cross to participate in pilgrimages and ceremonies at important religious and cultural sites on both sides of the border, to visit family and friends, and to pay respects to loved ones buried in cemeteries on either side. Today, only a portion of our ancestral territory is encompassed within the boundaries of our current reservation. Originally, our homelands ranked well beyond these boundaries, ranged well beyond these boundaries, and included what is now Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, and San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge. The nation has significant and well-documented connection to these lands and the religious, cultural, and natural resources located there, including at Quito Vaquito Springs and at Monument Hill. The National Park Service, the federal agency with management authority at the Organ Pipe National Monument, has acknowledged that Quito Vaquito Springs is sacred to the nation. Nevertheless, CBP contractors working on the border wall recently bulldozed a large area near Quito Vaquito Springs, destroying burial grounds. Another culturally important site is Monument Hill, which is the final resting place for many of our ancestors who recovered bones fragments from these show. Earlier this month, CBP contractors conducted blasting there, notifying the nation of its plans only the day the blasting occurred. And I am sorry to report that just 2 hours ago, CBP conducted another controlled detonation at Monument Hill. The federal government's continued destruction of our religious and cultural resources and nothing less but bulldozing of our church grounds and our cemeteries. For us, this is no different from DHS building a 30-foot wall along Arlington Cemetery or to the grounds of the National Cathedral. This destructive actions would not have occurred without the waiver provision in Section 102C of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. That allows DHS to waive any law it wishes in order to expedite border barrier construction. We urge Congress to withdraw or at least limit DHS waiver authority as it is dangerously broad and has allowed DHS nearly dictatorial authority to run roughshod over the rights of the Tohono O'odham and other border communities in the United States. There is no acceptable reason why border communities should not be protected by the same laws and have the same ability to challenge agency action as Americans living in every other part of the United States. Making matters worse for us is the lack of an enforceable tribal consultation requirement. While agencies pay lip service to consultation, tribal governments have little ability to enforce consultation policies when federal agencies choose to ignore them. A statutory consultation requirement would help put an end to the frequent disregard for our concerns, our expertise, and our right to self-determination. The federal government owes our government and the governments of local border communities more respect. We wish to thank Chairman Grijalva and Subcommittee Chairman Gallego for their efforts to resolve this continuing problem through their introduction in the last Congress of the requirements, expectations, and standard procedures for executive consultation with Tribes Act, and for recently holding a hearing on similar draft legislation. Preservation of history and culture of O'odham is not just important to the Tohono O'odham Nation, it is important to the preservation of the history and culture of the United States. As we preserve Civil War battlefields and cemeteries and honor holy places of worship everywhere in the United States, we also must preserve and protect such places of significance to the O'odham and First Americans in this part of our country. The nation thanks you for shining a light on an ongoing destruction of our cultural resources and sacred sites. I am happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so in that particular little section then, so it talks about some other things for these, and then they go on to say some of the others. So I'm going to go out of this one. And back over to you all. Part of that whole, and you can see that's one of their tribal authorities there, and part of the whole thing that's going on with them during that. They didn't include it on that particular one, but I let it go because it's exactly what's happening here in California, and it has to do with many things that are very similar to what we're thinking about as we begin to take a look at understanding what may have been going on in cultures that have really different identity and values and so on and so forth. At one point, he actually breaks down and has to struggle to not start crying. So he's using the vocabulary of the modern group and saying, these are our churches, these are our cemeteries, this is where our our elders tell us that everyone is. But because all the rest, well, one, we've got some racist stuff going on there. You can't erase that from border wall is a mess in every way thinking of it. But also the other part of it is that they're saying, no, we went out there, we looked, there's nothing out there. It's just a hill. There's just some cactus. You just travel back and forth down there. We didn't destroy anything. And they're saying, you're destroying our sacred environment. And that's kind of what we're looking at in the best case scenario with this. So without it being too long. At any rate, I do find that website interesting. I don't have tons of time, and you probably don't either, all the time for just exploring around, but that's a pretty good one that gives some different voices, some different perspectives of things that are going on, not just here, but all over Latin America. So they have sections of the site for some other things. All right, so let's go back to thinking about, where am I finishing up here? We were here, back to this one. Here, and we looked at culture for just a moment. I think we finished right here with these particular look at some buildings. Just to, I know, because it's been quite a few days, and now with some people without electricity, some people just who have to be moving out of their neighborhoods, some really sad things going on with houses burning down, and you know, all the other stuff that's going on in San Diego. It's better to do just a little overlap. So again, while we'll be going through our class and other things that you might be looking at, within a region where they have a lot of shared cultural features, such as Mesoamerica, right, where it's a lot of different societies speaking different languages, writing their languages down using different forms of scripts or different symbolic purposes for this, building buildings that they're going to conduct rituals that have a very similar purpose, but the buildings don't necessarily resemble each other so closely. So this idea that, yes, they are constructing something in order to perform these rituals, this is linked to what your last few notes were, that in different cultures, the way that it looks right to us is going to be different. And that doesn't really change whether you're asking us today about what a religious space or what a sacred space or what a sacred practice might be than it did in the past. So here in a rainforest setting, we have a platform pyramid here with a stair that goes up the front and one room at the top. This was originally very ornate. One room at the top where a certain type of ritual was taking place. Here, at a different site in the state of Oaxaca, this particular site, the same thing is here, but a different set of decisions on the shape of the building, on how tall it would be, on how wide the staircase is, and how many rooms would be at the shrine type structure at the top, and then how it would be decorated and so on and so forth, depending on their own individual identity for these. But in both cases, you all, both of these buildings are supposed to, and they still do when people go, it's really easy to see this. These are man-made mountains. These are not making something smooth and four-sided that doesn't exist in nature, a real pyramid structure. These are human constructed mountains, because mountains are powerful places on the landscape and points of connection with other sorts of things. So the shape of those, or how tall and skinny it has to be in order to stick up above the forest, is going to change. So last couple things about culture, just as a general, because I know that this might not be something that you've ever gotten in another course. Culture is information, right? It's mental. We're not born with our culture in any way that we can detect. We start learning it right about the time that you're born, and it composes of everything: sound, movement, you know, physical experiences, learning, survival, and all the rest of it. So humans learn their culture. It isn't instinctive, but also, since culture does comprise how we solve problems, it does mean that different cultures are going to learn sometimes really different strategies for problem solving. And again, that's also something else that contributes to when we see things going on in the modern world where you have people that are perhaps indigenous or from a totally different cultural background attempting to work through issues with another group who doesn't use the same problem solving strategies. So we do learn that it is passed down, and as it's passed down, then that becomes part of our identity from our ancestors, from your family, from experiences, and then of course from symbolic sources. And again, as the class goes on and we look at so many of these things that still survive from the ancient culture, you can really see that they're passing on using shapes, using colors, using sometimes scenes of things, sometimes not, and so forth, really distinct information. And the last one here, then, between the members of a culture, they're going to share those same patterns. They can share their and predict each other's behaviors. They have their own built-in definition of what is normal, expected, not acceptable, or what is considered a strong, wantable behavior versus things that you would rather people behave in a particularly different manner. Okay, so culture again is learned from us. All right, so let's stop this one. Actually, close this one out and stop this one and go do something else. Okay, I'm going to close that because I didn't click on that one. All right, so related to what we were looking at then is something that a lot of outsiders are aware of, which is the work of practitioners within animistic worldviews, right, where you've got a connection or you are acknowledging culturally that there is more to the world than what we can physically experience, that there is an incorporeal world, that it is important to be able to, if you can't do it yourself, find an expert that can help you to work on these. So the generic term for these experts is shaman, shaman, or a few other ways that we might hear it pronounced. But as I think I mentioned last time, this is a borrowed word from a Siberian indigenous culture. And so it really doesn't matter a whole lot how you might feel like pronouncing it, because none of us are pronouncing it the way that they actually did. So this more or less academically, in a college sense, is looking at something called cognitive archaeology. We are trying to, as best that we can, study the way that people from ancient cultures thought and how that worked when they were making decisions or planning. So yeah, so easier than this. So past ways as inferred from material remains, or in other words, looking at what's left, how can we study what people in the past thought about and why they thought about it that way? So a few things that are encompassed in this that you've got in various places in your reading. You might look at it in art history class. It might pop up in some other philosophy or world religions courses and so forth. So prehistoric means just not having written records that tell you everything you want to know, written by the people themselves. So while we do have some inscriptions from Mesoamerica, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, massive amounts of book burning during the early Spanish period erased much of what we might have been able to use to understand some of these things. So religious beliefs and rituals. Rituals, you all don't always have to have anything to do with something that is supernatural. We do rituals for other problem solving as well, but with looking at the ancient past, a lot of times we don't have a record of what those were. Cosmology. What's the relationship between planet Earth and the living things on planet Earth with what they can see in the sky for the rest of the universe? How do they see that it's constructed? The motion that we see, how do they understand how that's working? And have they applied any symbolic associations to those? So for instance, with cosmology, one of the basics that's really different than the world that we're living in right now is time. We think of time as a number. It's something mechanical. We need it to be shared among all of us all the time because our urban societies work that way, right? And actually the way that we survive, most of us, is by having our labor, our energy, and our training being translated into a symbolic format. That symbolic format is money. And so you do something and you expect that you're going to get this symbolic placeholder in return. In the ancient world, time wasn't a number. Time was motion, right? The only way to tell what time it was to watch and see where the sun was, where the moon was, where constellations were, the day length, the transition from seasons. So time and motion, what you can see in the sky, aren't two different things. They weren't registering time using something that's mechanical. So cosmology is not just looking at how the sky is actually working and what you see up there, but it's also, well, I mentioned it a couple times ago, for us, while we separate astronomy from astrology, for the ancient world, they are the same thing as far as we can figure out from what we can see recorded and the use of it and what people remember when they're telling us about what their indigenous cultures are doing. And then ideology. Ideology is just the ideas, right? What do you think about things? What is their belief system? And iconography is the study of the visual symbols. So iconography, so when you see something that's a particular color, or when you see an image from Mesoamerica of something that looks like a coyote, but it's walking on two legs and it's holding a dripping heart, that's an icon. The same, right? So from the Christian background, if you see a white dove flying in the middle of a painting from early centuries AD, then it's not a bird, it's something else, right? It's an icon of another idea that people had. So we'll be looking at lots of these kinds of things as we go. So just generally or academically, because I know some of you, this is your major, this is a part of using cognitive archaeology. Okay, so we need a couple real simple terms, and I would like you to be able to feel more confident. And so I'll just linger on this for a moment so you can just jot down these definitions. If you don't jot it down now, you could go back at some other time and rewatch the program, but that just, it's not a time waster, but it just eats up twice as much time. So it's really kind of up to you how you really want to do this. But I know that there's lots of ways that students manage this type of classroom environment. So religion, whatever a culture believes in regards to something that's called supernatural. Supernatural is not a derogatory or mean term. Supernatural means something that is more than or other than the physical world. So things you can't touch, or you can't always hear, or not everyone can see. So, and there isn't any set of beliefs from this. Cosmology, so studying the universe altogether, how whatever the way that a society can do that. How do they relate to one another? What's the relationship between the sun, the moon, and the earth? Or does a culture see that there has anyone? When they're looking at the Milky Way, which you and I here in this part of the world now can't see. So some of the things that we are going to look at, unless you've ever really gone out to the middle of nowhere, where you're nowhere near any cities from the distance, it isn't until you do that that you actually can see why so many cultures in the ancient world would have these images that are reflecting what they could see, iconography, icons that are reflecting what they think about the universe, that are looking like boats beings in boats, things traveling on a river. I was completely overwhelmed in a good way when I first started working on some projects in an area of the Pacific coast, much further south than here, where there was no electricity. So there was no light pollution. So once the sun went down, you could see everything in the night sky, and it was so much more than we ever experience here, right? Because a photo won't do it any good, even if we took one. Ideology, again, concepts. Now, these are things that are not material. Your ideology, and it can clearly be very, very political about human life or nature, whatever it is that you're learning. Remember, that's part of your culture, so it is learned. Humans don't have a centered or inborn familiarity with any of these things. And then again, iconography. We would call that art. They don't necessarily call it art. Your creativity, your ability to construct things that have color, shape, texture, size, and so forth in order to represent your belief system. We have so many in our culture, we don't really think of them that way. And this isn't always things that would be religion. So for instance, in my house, if I want to have, let's say, cups or coffee cups or something else that I want to drink out of that I don't want to share with my husband, if I don't want him using my stuff, frequently this is true, for a variety of reasons, because he's got his own stuff, because he doesn't always tidy things up in the same manner that I do. All I have to do is get anything that isn't silver like metal, dark gray like metal, or black like metal. If it's a bright color, if it has a flower on it, a cartoon character, anything else, he won't touch it or drink out of it, even in the house, even with no one looking at him. Okay, he's not young, but the same thing with everything else. If I don't want him using my towels, because sometimes he'll take them out and do other stuff, all I have to do is make sure that they are not dark gray. He would never touch a towel with a pattern on it, ever. So that's iconography, and it has nothing to do with ritual or other kinds of things. Whatever the identity that he learned within his family of what masculinity was, it's very, very small defined. Yeah. He looks every day like he's wearing exactly the same clothes because he only buys one or two shapes in one or two colors. So it looks like he doesn't do his laundry all the time, which he does, and that kind of stuff. But no, there's no color or pattern variation. He has worn exactly the same stuff since I met him. That's iconography. That's him identifying his, relating to his family background and their definition of being masculine and all of that. So yeah. I don't really get it exactly, but yes. But yeah, it just goes on and on and on. On the other hand, there's things that probably, well, no, I don't really care about what stuff looks like too much. I'm a little bit more open than him maybe, but I like cartoons, animated stuff and so forth. All right, so how does the concept of shamanism fit into this? We're going to just do a short look. In fact, you could do an entire semester course and still not run out of things to read or learn about it. But people that function as shamans are actually here in our society too, in urban society. They're in lots of different places, and you may have visited them or constantly go to these types of people for guidance or health issues or so forth. But the actual function and practice varies a little bit by culture, but you'll see some of the basic things. So shamanism is not one specific religion. So there's that part. And they do work within a system that we would classify as animistic, right? Where there's a non-corporeal world. So it isn't a specific church or learning pattern or set of doctrines. So a shaman, or the concept of it, exists within animistic thought processes. And the term is applied to people who have some well-developed or identified skills that the community values when they're working within this concept that spirits of other types of beings pervade the cosmos. And that sometimes it's important, needed, or required that at least someone in the society can personally contact those spirit beings by means of achieving an altered state of consciousness. Another one here. So again, and so we've got just trying to make it as brief for you for these little definitions, just so that it's not, doesn't get too fuzzy. So in other words, spirit then animating, bring to life, right? Consciousness, focus, need to feed, a presence that interacts with other living things. So you could think of it as a force or a power, but it's always incorporeal. So we get that to a certain extent, right? We have that in our society. Not every single person believes in a supernatural world or something like the universal consciousness, or in a god, gods, goddesses, that kind of thing. But we hear lots of other people talk about it, and so we do have vocabulary and ideas that work around this. For those of us that are mainly living within or trained within the Mediterranean religious viewpoint of relating to the roots of Christianity and a number of other side kinds of groups there. Then, for instance, for humans, you've been trained and do or don't accept that humans have a soul. So that would be our spirit force that causes us to be alive, aware, and interacting with other things around us. In just some of the indigenous societies that we're going to look at in class later on, they're trained that humans and other things that they define as alive in the same awareness that humans have two souls. One that would be part of how they think or how they feel. So kind of that when people go, touch our chest, we learn to grip your chest when something impressive is happening, or you're very sad, or you're trying to connect with someone else's emotional state. But for them, there's a second one, and it's in your blood. So many of these ritual practices that you already know we're going to look at, because we mentioned them in the definition of Mesoamerica, is letting blood. So we looked at auto sacrifice, where we saw an image of a Maya queen actually making a hole through her tongue and then dragging this cord with thorns in it to get even more blood to continue to flow from her mouth, and then collecting that. She was collecting and then getting ready to offer her blood or her soul force. So it isn't just that it's blood. It's that she's offering this bit of the energy that causes her to be alive. So, but for us, we just have one soul force for this one. Okay. So there's a few universal or cross-cultural aspects of shamanic practice. Cultures that still use it on the day-to-day around the world still have, are more closely related with certain types of economies. So for societies that collect their food from the landscape, they don't farm or raise animals, that's called foraging. Pastoral are societies where most of their economy is from animal raising. So they are taking these herds of animals out on the landscape, watching them. Whether we're looking at sheep herding in the Middle East, and in Western Asia, whether we're looking at people from other parts of the world where they're still really surviving with camels, goats, so some of the African societies and so forth. Pastoralism is still partly. For us, mainly those poor animals are not traveling around on the day-to-day. They're just living in sort of feedlots indoors and so forth, or agricultural societies. So when I say simple, nothing simple about being an agriculturalist. It's really hard and it's really risky and there's a ton of things you need to know about. But in this case, these will be agricultural societies where it's not a giant corporation that owns the land and is deciding what to grow. So in this case, this will be people that are growing the foodstuffs that themselves and their community are eating on the day-to-day. Not very much of it is going to leave their small area. So, you know, fruits, vegetables, that sort of thing. Do we still have in urban world that you're in right now these types of practitioners? And absolutely, and they get, because they're in so many other areas, they end up getting different titles like medicine man or medicine woman or some of these. In National City, in the western edge of National City, there's still a business that's been there as long as I can remember, and I think was there probably about, yeah, for my entire lifetime and maybe more, that has a giant modern sign now that says that they're a psychic. And you can go and they can do several different kinds of things. It's right on the northern edge of the mile of cars as you leave National City towards the gas lamp up there. But there are some that are much more basic community oriented and not so easy to find, that I actually have gone to visit and found really overwhelmingly viable, where they have some of these, they look like regular Christian churches, but the type of practice inside is not exactly the same as what you would see in some of these. So, but if you've seen videos or visited people that are doing, you know, some of the things where they're doing something where the person looks like says they're healing the person or removing some sort of bad energy for you or something, and you kind of watch with your own eyes and it doesn't look like much is going on. This is generally a modernized form of shamanic practice. They are doing something, we just can't see it unless we are experts in the same. So it is a borrowed term from a very specific Siberian culture, and here is a more 1900 style photo of a couple of mature experts from Siberia. Here's another woman who was identified as being one of their practitioners from that particular part of the world. So the term isn't totally made up, we just borrowed it. We, modern people, just borrowed it from indigenous societies. You can see some of their equipment here. There's a big bear skin here and some other things going on. All right. So what are some of the basic characteristics that we're looking at here? So going back to last week, when we were talking about the animistic worldview and the animistic world. If you live in a culture where you accept that living beings don't have to have a physical body, and you also recognize that most humans can't see, talk to, hear, or communicate in any other way with those beings, then you have specialists in the society that can communicate directly to them. We can't necessarily see them doing it unless that's our place in society. They travel. This is another one, very, very universal for this type of practice all around the planet. They'll say that they go places. Their body doesn't go anywhere. Their soul force, which is their other personality, travels. And this, in English, we might say they're going to another dimension, right? They're going someplace where things aren't corporeal. Altered states of consciousness. So when I see you before we finish up with the whole unit. We'll work on this in Monday, week from Monday, altered states of consciousness. So does this require smoking something, eating something, or doing something else? The answer is no. And in a lot of cultures, the most mature or important of their shamanic leaders will say that none of that is required, but consuming something, putting something into your body so that you can achieve an altered state is something that outsiders might try to do, or people that don't have an innate gift. But in many cases, they're able to achieve that altered state of consciousness without consuming any of the extra consumables. We'll give a list and put them in some specific categories for next Monday before we finish up with the unit. And let me go back. One more. I'm going to go back to this when we're looking with this. So this soul travel, this also is frequently linked with saying that you can transfer to another form of organism. So in many, many cases, they have an animal spirit companion, and they will say that they do their traveling in the form of a wolf, or in the form of a jaguar, or in the form of a bird, or something else that's in there. And again, do they really care if other people outside say that you can't confirm that and they're making it up, or it's just a fantasy? They don't, because they are existing in something that's much larger than our form of consciousness. So when people try to mock them, that's when they really feel much, much more capable, because they know that you just don't understand what's going on. When people watch them doing like some of the healing things that I've seen happen in various places in Latin America, where somebody will come, they're very sick with something, and so the person makes some sounds, heats something up, has got some heating sap going on, some compal incense. I've seen a few where they'll take something that looks like an egg and rub it over the person's skin while they're doing the thing, and people say, see, they're lying, or they press on someplace. They're not really doing anything. And the more senior of these shamanic practitioners will say, we just do that so that you think something's happening. Everything that's actually happening is in the soul universe. And so if I didn't do anything you could see, all you would think was happening is that we stood there for an hour, because you can't see what's happening. And so I'm like, oh, wow, very cool. Or somebody else who's an outsider might say, yeah, that makes no sense. So difficult sometimes. So a shaman then is a person who deliberately uses an altered state of consciousness to access reality for power, right? Energy or information. Sometimes they can or are supposed to manipulate life force or spirit entities. Most of the time, though, they say that they are getting information, that they're going on the travel to find out from the bigger inventory of powerful living beings what is going on, what caused your illness, what future events to plan for, what is going on with someone that seems to have lost their will to live. Have you lost connection with your soul or your soul force, or other kinds of things? A lot of times you'll see, and I bet this is resonant with quite a few of us, particularly maybe here in the South Bay, more so than maybe other regions of the US, where you'll find people that will go to a Western style doctor and also want the services of something that's more shamanic, no matter what they call it, a healer, indigenous medicine, and so forth. And when asked why, they'll frequently say, well, I go to the Western doctor because they can give me, let's say, medication because my stomach and my digestion is really, really painful, and I don't feel well, and I don't want it to hurt, and I need to be able to digest my food. And then they'll say, but then why do you go to the spirit healer as well? Do you think that the Western doctor or urban doctor isn't going to help you. And they'll say, no, I think they'll probably help me. I go to the spiritual healer because I want to find out why me? Why do I have this disease? Why did I, while I was walking outside with several other people, trip and break my arm? Why didn't it happen to someone else? Why is it that I am having trouble feeling energetic? Why do I feel, right? So they're looking for the cause, and they know that Western medicine doesn't tell you the cause of these things usually. They're just saying, well, it just happens, or you got older. I love that one. Well, you know, you're older now and digestion is harder because blah, blah, blah. So they can frequently just interact, but in some cases, there are cultures that believe that they're more powerful and they might be able to manipulate. Oh, very cool. They might be able to manipulate the opinions of some of these spirit entities. A lot of times, if it's just for their whole community, they're worried about soil fertility, or why hasn't it rained yet, or if you're going to have bad storms, or is someone applying witchcraft to a person, a family, the community to cause bad things to happen. So why did we see that lady, the image of the lady from last week, doing to herself, making the hole in her tongue, releasing some of her blood and her soul force there. And what was the overall purpose of all of the events around that? She was going into an altered state of consciousness. She was using the pain and the preparation for being able to do this calmly in order to have communication with somebody or something from the spiritual world. In that particular case, because she was a queen, she was communicating with a warrior ancestor in order to get information to plan for the future and do her job as a queen. All right. Couple last ones. They can be male or female. Sometimes there's not only one in a community, it just depends. Many cultures have more than male or female gender identities, so those can be included as well. It just depends on the continent, the time frame, and the specific culture. Their abilities are recognized by their own group. In some cases, they're born and the group identifies them as children, as having this particular job ahead of them. They can work for individuals, or they might be working for the whole group, but sometimes they're only working when someone needs them, and the rest of the time they are raising animals, doing farming, or some other kind of thing. Here's the last one for us. They can be considered dangerous all the time, or have the ability to do something that might cause a backlash, or they can be seen as generally just working for healing, health, or thinking about the future, planning for the future. So they can also, while they are incredibly respected, they can also be distanced socially because people are nervous about what it is they can actually do and why they might actually be doing that. So it might be, well, as you could guess, right? If you can't even see most of the rest of the world, right? In the phrase, in English, sometimes you'll hear that phrase, behind the shadow veil, behind the curtain. Since we can't really see that, then they might, be in the position to tell us whatever they feel like telling us, or do whatever you feel like that might like to be. I don't know if there's more that I think we actually need at this particular point here. Get out of this one. Oh, yeah, okay, I've got a couple more, and then I'm going to switch over to talking about going back over to Canvas and getting going on our route, which won't be every single week for the rest of the semester, but on and off. We have weeks where there are things you need to do for some points. So, and to complete those. All right, so few more things. Now, what do we see then directly to Mesoamerica? So if we're just saying that they exist all over the place in lots of different places in the world. They still have work that people would like them to do, but the exact format of that work, how they achieve it, what they're going to dress like, are they meditating into that state? Are they smoking or consuming something else? Is there something else that's going on? Is going to vary by cultures. But in Mesoamerica, since that's the title of our course, then how is that working for those? All right. So for societies that use this in Mesoamerica, whether they're Maya, Zapotec, Nahuatl, right? And we're going to look at a few other basic cultural groups. Their universe that they are working within is holistic, right? Everything is connected, and dualistic, right? And we talked about duality as a worldview orientation last week, right? Corporeal and incorporeal are two parts of looking at the same thing. Life and death are two aspects of looking at the same thing. So everything's interconnected, and the universe is composed of lots of pairs of opposites. And then there might be something in the middle. So take a look at this. You've seen lots of these. Sometimes we love these. Pre-Columbian art here, and again, I don't love using pre-Columbian, but that's usually how you're going to find it if you do a little bit of a search. But if you're looking for Mesoamerican images, you'll start to notice that lots of people we know or interact with or see carry these today as tattoos. But frequently when I ask, especially if it's a big fancy one, they actually don't know exactly what it is, but they do know where it came from, and they are celebrating that their family comes from this particular area of the world, which I think is very, very cool. So if we look at this one, without saying what culture it is, see how we've got two individuals here. One is dressed with a particular, this one's really awesome. This particular headdress, you all, is actually a living sacrificial knife worn on top of the head as a headdress. The other one here seems to be something related to something to do with vegetation. We've got this tree-like element here with the two cross branches. That is an icon of the construction of the universe. And up on top, we've got this bird, and it's not an actual bird. This is something that is metaphysical that's up here. So we see them on both sides. There's balance here. Obviously, they're showing this as related to going up the steps or the tiers of those ritual buildings and then standing on top. So we've got a set of pairs here with an intermediary or third element in between. We've got some other direction connectors here. This is a bird, a jaguar, some animal here. It could be a deer, something else, and then something that's floral here. This is a fairly recent piece of art. So post-classic just means that this was created younger than about 1000 AD. All right, so unity of opposites, sometimes with something in the middle. And again, I'm recording this, so if you really like these images, you want to go back to it, you'll be able to, in a few days, get it back on Zoom with a link, and I'll post it once it's ready. The second one, the world tree. Okay, here's a fancier one. This is from classic Maya art. Many of you have seen this one as well, but here we go. So the shamanic universe has these layers or levels. There's the world that humans are on, there is above, and there is below. The below, in some of the Mesoamerican cultures, has also more levels. Above may as well. So there's going to be some combination in Mesoamerica where they're really showing the difference between the earth itself and the sky above, and then the break-even point is frequently shown as water, but sometimes it's a building, and then something that's below. Then the layers are connected, and this is just a phrase that you want to jump down. Axis Mundi. We see this in a lot of places in the world. It comes from even older variants of human societies, right? Humans have been on the planet for looking exactly like us for 300,000 years. So there's a lot of things that have shared as cultures start in one place and then people move and interact with each other. So this is frequently called the world tree, but it can also be in the landscape shown as people standing on either side of something that's smoking, right? Rainbows, there's a whole bunch of them. So the connector, the things that are connecting the sky with the realm where people are, where if all you can do is just use your regular senses, you'll be able to know, and then the underworld. So this world tree, we see this in what people wear, we see it inscribed on artwork, we see figurines of it, we see ceramic containers that depict it. This is, again, very similar to the one we saw before, just fancier. So we've got something that's skeletal down here at the bottom, this pole-looking thing that has branches out to the side with something that links over the top, and then again the celestial bird over the top with a pair of celebrants on either side of it. The bird looks like a super overdressed kind of chickenish looking bird. Clearly it's not a chicken, but I always like looking at it. So Axis Mundi, or the world tree in Mesoamerica. And this world tree is holding the sky off the earth so that humans have a space that we can be in, that we can grow things, that we can find water, that we can find life. Then, okay. Let's look at another one of these. Okay, so here's another way of thinking about the Axis Mundi. So this is from a laser scan of a modified cave system called Balancanche. It's in the Yucatan Peninsula. Right now on learning map activities, the very first phase of this, we're just asking you some rivers, mountains, volcanoes, and only a couple of giant landscape things for the states of Mexico that are within Mesoamerica, right down to, not into the Yucatan Peninsula, but right down through about the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. So I'm not giving you everything that we're going to need to know, but we need to know where the states are before we start learning separate particular sites. So those states, some of the big rivers, a couple of lakes, and then a couple of important to Mesoamericans, volcanoes. Now, in this particular cave system, which ancient people used a long time ago in order to conduct rituals, but also get water, we see that this is the ground level. So when they did this scanning, so up here's be where the ground is. And then they went down into here and then dug down into another little chamber. And why is this a sacred space? Look at it. It's got the 3 tiers. It's got a sky, a middle part, and a lower level. We know that they made all kinds of sacrifices there, sometimes human sacrifice as well, not so often in this particular area as some. So this is near the site, a super popular site for tourists and globally, Chichen Itza, which is in the center part of the Yucatan Peninsula, and this cave that's been used since before the city was built for there. So you're seeing how this large underground thing that was formed naturally then gets expressed by people who've been down there and thinking about why the earth, right? Because the earth is a living being for Mesoamericanists in an animistic world, why the earth would have shaped it this way for this. So I love the addition to technology to taking a look at some of these things. So, and also, so here's our last one. Also, not only that the world has 3 levels that are really distinct, and we're going to see them all the time, and that we've got that axis mundi or world tree that's holding all the pieces where they need to be, but they also lived in a world that had 4 quadrants. And we'll see this constantly in costuming, in jewelry, in map locations, with a 5th direction. So for them, they have the north, south, east, and west, and also the center. Because the world tree is holding everything up, the center is a direction. So in any particular urban society in this ancient world, the center of the city was the center direction, was the center of their universe, and then everything radiated out for it. So the 4 quadrant is not unusual for us too, but in terms of iconography, those directions are typically associated with 4 different colors, with 4 different animals as having their own spirit identities, and in some cases relating to periods of time during the day. And then the center, which is the 5th direction. So this would be quincunx rather than 4, not a quadrant, but a quincunx, would be the intersection of all 4 of them. So why did the most powerful, most impressive, most significant rituals happen in the center of these communities? Because this was the center of all reality. So if you wanted to do something as a human that was above and below, that was in all of the radiating areas, then there would be center zones where these things must always be conducted. And we see this in all of these sites, these big center plaza areas with lots of shrines and buildings and other kinds of monuments and things that go with them. Okay, so we're going to stop this for now. And so I'm going to stop the recording. Yes.